about how mail-in voting is ripe for abuse. With me now from the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, good to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, Hans, talk to me about this. What's the primary reason that mail-in voting is not a good idea?
Well, because the ballots are voted outside the supervision of election officials, and that means that voters can be intimidated or pressured, and it's much easier for ballots to be stolen, forged, altered, or in other ways used to cheat in elections.
Okay, so we have some concrete examples of this because, as you know, anytime we talk about election integrity or voting integrity, those on the other side accuse us of trying to be voter suppressors or some such nonsense. This has actually happened. In Texas, there were ballot pirates, and this is just in the last election, ballot pirates who intercepted the ballots of elderly people and forced their signatures, of course, coercing them to vote the way that the pirates wanted them to vote. The other issue that I would talk about that makes this very ripe for abuse is ballot harvesting. I'm not sure that this is a very common concept. So ballot harvesting is essentially when a third party, which is any person who is not the voter and not an election official, picks up the mail-in ballot of the voter and drops that ballot off at the polling place of the voter. This is illegal in some states and legal in other states, but in my opinion, that has extreme vulnerability for election fraud right there.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and it's a foolish way to conduct elections. And the reason is this. Look, it's one thing to allow a voter himself to return his absentee ballot or a member of his family if he doesn't want to mail it in. But states that have legalized vote harvesting say that anyone, and that can include candidates, campaign volunteers, political consultants, to pick up ballots. These are all people with a stake in the outcome of the election. And giving them something as valuable as a ballot, which they may alter or not deliver or otherwise misuse, is a very bad idea.
And again, we have an example of this. This is not hypothetical. In the state of California, a Democratic operative was caught on camera going door to door, knocking on voters' doors, asking if this individual could deliver the ballots of those who had the mail-in version, drop them off at the polling place, but only if the voters were Democrats. That does not sound like free and fair elections. That sounds ripe for coercion, for piracy, meaning altering the ballot. And there's no way that you would ever know because there's no voter ID when you do deliver the ballot. You have no idea if that signature was forged or if that signature is the signature of the voter. President Trump is exactly right on this. Hans, the other thing I want to talk to you about is federalizing elections because there's a push among Democrats. It's actually being led by Elizabeth Warren, who wants the federal government to be in charge of how states conduct their elections. Tell me why this is a bad idea.
Look, it's a bad idea, and the framers of the Constitution, in fact, put in a decentralized election system where the states run elections. Why? Because they didn't want politicians in Washington, people in Congress and the White House, to be able to set the rules, manipulate the rules so that they, as incumbents, could stay in office. And that's why the federal government, particularly Congress, should not be setting the rules for running elections in the states.
Right. And of course, this was brought to everybody's attention because of what happened in Wisconsin in the Supreme Court ruling. So essentially, and this is according to a National Review article, and I want to read it. The Supreme Court ruled, and this is related to Wisconsin, that a federal court was not empowered to overwrite Wisconsin's election laws and force the state to accept ballots without any postmark, deadlines nearly a week after the election. Likewise, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that Governor Tony Evers did not have the authority to arbitrarily suspend in-person voting. Good for the Supreme Court, by the way, especially under immense pressure, to read the Constitution as it was intended and not write any of their politics into it. But this is actually, it's my argument against both early voting, but also this late voting where you can drop off your ballot up to 6 days afterward. Voters have different information depending on when they vote. So if a voter votes a month before an election and then you get to the Friday before an election when all the candidates drop their biggest scandals and hurl the most mud at their opponents, you don't have the choice to go back and change your vote if the new information would change your mind about whether to support or oppose a certain candidate. Likewise, if you vote late, you may have more information that makes it unfair to those who voted on time because you may know something that they don't know. That's a powerful argument, I think.
Oh, no, it is. And in fact, this is particularly true what you said during primaries. Don't forget, before Super Tuesday, remember, Senator Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, they both dropped out just a day or two before the Super Tuesday primary. That means that literally hundreds of thousands of voters wasted their votes, particularly in places like California and Texas, voting for folks who were no longer in the race on election day. They couldn't pull back their votes and change.
Yeah, I think it was something like 10% of votes in California in the Democratic primary were votes for candidates who had dropped out of the race before the primary day actually happened. The thesis of this segment is President Trump is exactly right about mandatory mail-in voting. He's exactly right about voter ID. And the Supreme Court was exactly right to give Wisconsin the right to keep control of their elections and not allow somebody else to dictate, some other federal entity to dictate to them how they were to run elections. Hans, thank you for your expertise on this. I appreciate it.